think I did. I think I closed out all of these and I found some. And just a lot of professors who publish me.
Well, an extra pen.
You're gonna have to clean it up.
There's one.
Okay.
I have one pen for my ranger. You have your discussion.
So, right, close your ears for 1 minute. Okay. Make it a practice going forward that we're always going to do a thank you card for our presenter. Okay, so it'll be circling around, and then as they leave, we'll go ahead and give it to them. So just sign your name, your best penmanship possible. Welcome, everybody to seminar. Are you glad to be here?
Yeah.
You did a really good job in our discussion. And thank you again to our moderators. And who are our moderators for this week? Okay.
Who's online?
Okay, awesome. You two know what to do. You know the drill. The problem is me. You have to send it to me, and I forgot to post it last week. It makes it a lot easier for a threaded discussion when I post it. So if you'll send me, both of you, your questions and just, Greg, they process this for the next week. They talk about it, they dissect it, There we go. Very good. And let's start with the word of prayer. Brianna, please.
Thank you for this day, for being here together to open the seminar. We thank you for all of our guests and their willingness to share their knowledge and expertise in the field. And we ask you for thy blessing after the seminar and meditation and say this thing in the name of Jesus Christ.
Amen. Thank you very much. Two more of you, or maybe three more of you, just finished your reflection on your interview. Well done. I think we're up to 8 out of 30. So keep on going after those interviews with the alumni, will you? And know that the early bird gets the alumnus that's available on that spreadsheet. You can see we're working our way through the list. So I wouldn't want to be last in the group there. So jump on that. Continue to work hard on your perspectives and dissertation and project defenses. I think we've had about 6 of the 30 do those. So that's awesome. Dr. McDonald, you come up for a minute, make an important announcement. And I have worked through all of the details. It will be recorded. And it will be recorded and also presented live.
Great. Okay. So you hopefully saw yesterday an email from the department about the honored alumni lecture coming up on October 14th. This is a lunch. It runs from 11:30 to 1. It's in the Wilkinson Center. And the alumni, David Nielsen, is a graduate of our department, which is how we were able to snag him for this honor. Go if you can, right? Our
Big deal.
Our department is being specially invited since he is an alumni from our department. There will be other students there, but they want to make sure as many of our students as possible get to be there. David's background, he's really been the primary mover for the last 20 years about how the church gets its message out to the world. So every major initiative the church has been involved in terms of public communications for 20 years, David has been involved in and now leads many of those efforts. So church websites, media strategies with radio, internet, television, every form of broadcast, and now the church handbook, the latest things that have been going on there the last few years. He's got fascinating stories. He's a great presenter, great speaker, and just a really fun, charismatic person to be around. You're really going to enjoy spending some time with him, getting to know him. If you have questions about the event, I can maybe answer some of those logistically. Is it going to replace a seminar that week? So it will be the replacement for seminar that week. Understandable that scheduling may not allow you to attend in person, but there will be recordings available that you can watch if you can't be there in person, but please make every effort to be there if you can.
And I will send you out an email again. You must RSVP for lunch, but they are allowing the graduate students to be there in person for free lunch. And we don't miss free lunches. Dr. Nielsen is amazing. I will also tell you, just in case you're interested in knowing, since I still remember I hired him at BYU as a student. I wondered once or twice, should I hire him or not? Because he's a big gamer. And of course, I didn't know the best instructional designers are the best gamers. So, and he loved to do role plays, and you're just he's just a special man, and
Impressive.
And how often is it that IP&T gets to recommend an alumnus? 6 years. So we will not have this happen again for another 5 or 6 years. T would represent the school, the McKay School of Ed, well anywhere. Anyway, so it's Friday, and I think 11:30 to 1 on October 14th. So there will be no seminar on Wednesday, October 12th. We're shifting that to that Friday because we want you all there. We know some of you may not be able to make arrangements. So if that's the case, we will make available to you a Zoom recording, but you will miss lunch. But RSVP as soon as we get that out to you. Anything else? Any other announcements before we turn the time over to Greg? This is supposed to be a 2-hour presentation, and we're only giving him 45 minutes. He's used to that though. Okay. Greg Danklef is the director of BYU HRD, Human Resource Development. Greg's a friend of mine and of the university. He does an amazing job meeting the needs of just all kinds of diverse bodies. I think most of the time you are presenting probably to administrators and to faculty, but these grad students, they're going to eat you alive, Greg. So have fun. Okay.
Yeah, there's nothing that makes me more nervous about a presenter than to be in front of a bunch of instructional designers, looking at everything that I'm going to be doing. No, it'll be good. Am I okay if I move a little bit so I'm not winded?
You just have to do this.
There we go. All right, so just start that up. All right, so what we're going to be doing, anyway, yeah, I'm the director of human resource development here on campus and part of our HR department. And there it is. Maybe. All right. Here we go. So part of what we do is just a different training and development opportunities for our employees here. And so sometimes students, sometimes our faculty, sometimes our staff and administrative employees, but it's a lot of fun. So I enjoy doing that. And this has been a particular topic that I've really enjoyed learning about and thinking about. And I've been presenting this in different forums the last couple of years. And so it's been really interesting. So I really just want to kind of jump into this by starting with a little bit of a game. Okay, the clicker's working, so that's always a good sign. All right, so here's what I want you to do is audibly, if you can, just finish the sentence with this. So we'll start with this first one. So for instance, the radius of a bike wheel is called a spoke. Okay, yeah, a spoke. I know. That one's a little bit hard to start. The rest of these are a little bit easier. So the radius of a bike wheel is called a spoke. It's like, wait, what? Okay, this one's easier. If I tell you something funny, it's a
Joke.
I don't drink Pepsi. I drink
Coke.
Really, it's Dr. Pepper. And then the white part of an egg is called a
No.
okay. Extra points. A in the class. Who knows what the white part of an egg is called?
Alumni.
Yeah, not the shell. That's the outside. Yeah. Which who knows that? Because we don't talk about that. I don't know. It's the egg whites, but that's not the official name. So album, right? Who said that?
Alumni.
Somebody got an A somewhere. I don't know. Okay, so that's interesting. Now, as we think about this, I feel like I love this example because it illustrates a little bit of what's happening in our brains with unconscious bias. Is that I prepped you for that, right? We have the rhyme happening. You've got finishing a sentence. We're having fun doing it, and then all of a sudden, something comes out without us really thinking about it, and it's wrong. So that's a little bit of what happens with our brains. So I like that as an introduction. So I like to show another one too that's kind of interesting. I don't know if any of you have seen this before. This is Andelson's checker shadow illusion. I mean, realistic depiction. So here, what I'd like to do is if you're looking at squares, there's two squares that are labeled A and B there. How would you describe those in comparison to each other, A and B? Just anybody with the,
A is above B.
okay, A is above B, all right, get that.
A is darker than B.
Okay, is darker than B, okay. It's like,
He's surrounded by other tiles and he isn't on all sides.
yeah, you get some good things there. Let's, what if I were to tell you that both squares A and B are the exact same color? Would you believe me? Like, you're setting me up again. Yes, I am. But you're looking at with how your eyes are, what your eyes are telling you here, does that seem off? Let's add some little context here. Now, all we did was added those two lines, and I'm telling you, I went back and forth when I saw this originally and thinking there's no way this is true. But I mean, if you add these just for context, looking at these, those are the exact. I even look in the PowerPoint where you can do the little dropper thing and it gives you the three numbers of what the color is. They're the same. What is happening here? It turns out that our brain fills in a lot of details for us. You know, with doing that, we see a checkerboard and we know what that's supposed to look like in our heads. And so even though they're the same, we cannot unsee this. It's like that. There was a thing going around. There's a gold dress and you know, and similar kind of things that were going in there. Our brain does this. And so what is happening? Well, we're seeing a little bit of the impacts of implicit bias and what's going on here. Now, I'm going to use that just as a definition here, implicit bias, and we use this interchangeably with unconscious bias. I don't know, unconscious, implicit, I've seen both of them used here, but these are the attitudes and stereotypes that do affect our understanding, our actions, what we see in a picture or an image, and the decisions in an unconscious manner. So these things are happening in the background. We're not even really aware of this and what's going on. So anyway, those are kind of some interesting things as we're thinking about. Now, where does this come from? The best of what I can figure out, or I can find it as far as research and everything. This is something that historically this has helped us stay safe. So we've got Cosmo's cousin here, and what we've done is you know, these types of shortcuts in our brain have helped us to stay alive. So instead of looking at something like this, in fact, I was doing a little run up near Park City once, came around a corner and there was a cougar about from me to the back of the room. So I had this experience, it's a little PTSD for me right here, but as I was looking at it and, you know, I just froze. And then luckily it ran the other direction and I ran the other way. That was the fastest mile I've ever run. So, but looking at this, you know, our brains, if we were to stop and say, okay, weighs approximately, I don't know, 80 pounds, looks like sharp teeth. Okay, that's not good. Claws. I mean, if we're stopping to think through all of those different things, you know, we're a lunch snack there for the cougar maybe. So what's happened is these shortcuts, right, have been developed to keep us alive, you know, historically and thinking about that. So trying to help us understand what's safe, what's not safe, and so on. And so, you know, one of the tricks with this is that when we take shortcuts, sometimes in this situation, we're like, oh, okay, that can help keep us alive. But when we're in different situations, sometimes that, you know, we make quick decisions or we kind of see things very quickly, and the decisions that we make sometimes are not very thought out. And so they can have impacts that we may not intend. The other thing too is the brain's always trying to preserve energy, right? So if it can create a shortcut, it will. And so that's part of what's happening and why our brains want to create these shortcuts, is just to make sure it doesn't have to expend so much energy going forward. So what in the world does this mean? Well, means that there are a lot of things that are happening and are influencing the way that we're processing all of the information that's coming at us. And sometimes we're not thinking through clearly. Sometimes that's great, sometimes it's a little rough. Okay, so how about this one? We receive 11 million bits of information every moment, estimated. I don't know how they figured that out, but how many bits do you think we're consciously aware of out of this? All right, how many of you think A? B? C? It's A, not very many. So out of all of this information that's hitting us, most of it is just happening, somewhere and it's really hard. Now, I think that's mind blowing, but I'm going to show you kind of a really cool chart of this research that's been looked at kind of by different biases. Now, and I realize you cannot see this because that's super small, but if you ever want to fall down in a funny or a really interesting internet rabbit hole there, just Google a cognitive bias codex. And what you'll see is this, and then you can actually click on every one of these. There are 188 different identified biases that we're faced with, that they've cataloged at this point, that have been researched. So some of these are like the IKEA effect, which I feel like is just trying to find your way out of somewhere. No, I mean, we've got like the sunk cost fallacy, recency effect, naive realism. There's so many halo effects, and some of these we're familiar with, and some of these are things you're like, wow, how did that even pop up? So we'll go through a few of these, but we can't possibly cover all of these. The point of this is just to look at this and say there is a lot that's influencing our brains all the time that we're not really consciously even aware of. So when we're looking at it and approaching it from this point of view, no wonder that sometimes it's hard to communicate. Sometimes that it's hard to kind of understand what's really going on, is because there are many things that are influencing what we see. So what it comes down to is we have a bias. We have biases all over the place. And so let's look a little bit at how this will show up in different ways. So just a couple of examples so you can see this. So medicine, there's, and a lot of times people will say, how's medicine biased? So a couple of examples. Women are less likely to be referred to knee replacement surgery than men, and less likely to receive what's the painkiller? Yeah, just any sort of yeah, any sort of painkiller. With painkiller. I don't know why that starts with an A.
Acetaminophen.
Oh no, these are all medicine. See, this is a weird guessing game, and I don't know why. Anyway, so anyway, the point, anesthesia. That's it. Oh, sheesh. Anesthesia. All right. Woo. So I got to write down. So anyway, another one. Black patients are less likely to be prescribed opioids, just in general. Now, and you might think, okay, so it's interesting in looking at that, but that can have a big impact long-term on entire groups of people. And there's all kinds of studies looking at that and seeing that phenomenon work there. So medicine, that's where sometimes this shows up. They're not intentional generally, but it shows up. How about, in the workplace, we might, mentor somebody because they say, you know what, they remind me of me. And we naturally want to gravitate to people that do remind us of ourselves because we really like ourselves and everything, but we're comfortable with who we are. And so we will tend to mentor and be around people that are like us, which tends to not lead to a lot of kind of a diverse group there. And this can happen in a lot of other ways too. For instance, when Google was first introducing YouTube, but put it on a mobile phone, what they found was that left-handers, when they would go to upload their videos, it was upside down. And it's because they had never tested it with a left-hander. All of the programmers were right-handed. They're like, oh, this works great. And then it didn't occur to them. Just the other day, somebody introduced me to an app that you can take a picture of something. This is because I was in a workshop and we were using this chart. It almost looks like a kind of a game board, but it's color coded. And this person was saying that her husband is colorblind to the extent that this looks like one color, really, or maybe kind of and so there's an app that you can get actually that will show you what it looks like to most people, and then kind of depending on the type of color blindness, it'll show you kind of side by side. Blew me away, right? And hadn't thought about it before, and I don't think the designers of the board had thought about that either. Anyway, so interesting. I mean, it's not that there's generally, or always a malicious intent here, but sometimes these things happen, and so this is how, and there are impacts. In academia, we see this too. There's an interesting study reported in the Inside Higher Education magazine. Fascinating stuff. And survey were the faculty were surveyed in 6,000 different faculty members. They sent out letters to all 6,000 of these faculty members, and in it, the letter was sent, and the person was kind of basically asking a graduate student asking to learn about the professor's work and looking to maybe set up some mentorship and things. So they sent the same letter out. All they did was they changed the name. And the name was kind of a pretty stereotypically either gendered or from different backgrounds. And so when the prospective grad student reached out for guidance, white males were the most likely to get attention or response from those. The survey also found, they cut this a lot of different ways, that public university faculty members were much more likely than their private counterparts to respond. And so it kind of went various ones, but the greatest, the ones that got the least response were Chinese women, the names there. So there was a large, like a big disparity in between a lot of ways to do it. And that's just one example of just access and different ideas of what's happening. Okay, and then the last one I was just going to ask you is, have any of you taken the IAT assessment out of Harvard? I would highly recommend this. If you haven't done that, you can check that out. But you can go in there and they will have you see images and do different things, but it can measure whether you have a bias. And there's a number of different ways. You can do it by race, you can do it by gender. There's a number of different things, religion. And so anyway, I would recommend that because we all want to say, of course, I'm not biased, even though we saw 188 different ways that we are. But it's kind of to see some data in front of you, and then your first reaction, of course, is always to say that must be wrong, but it's not. And so, anyway, interesting thing.
We'll send a link out to you, for all of you students, as part of our discussion this week.
Yeah. So anyway, it's good, and I would recommend it. And I think it's interesting. Take a couple of those and kind of sit with that and think about, what's happening here. It's a really interesting phenomenon as we're doing this. So, all right. So I did want to talk about a couple of these, and then we can talk a little bit or spend some time talking about what can we do to kind of think about this. So just to see other ways that this shows up, some of the most common biases that we do see that affect us in, say, the workplace or in school are gender. And so Sheryl Sandberg, who works with Facebook, reported that according to their research, if a woman has PTA somewhere on their resume, you think, okay, some leadership opportunities and different things. But what they found was that if a woman listed PTA on their resume, they had 80% fewer callbacks than if they did not list that experience. That's just one example. And I think we probably see examples of this, and we could probably talk about a number of different examples of this that we might see, here at BYU. One of the things that's been more recent is just remote work. As there's been more opportunities for remote work, just across the board, one of the things that we're starting to see is a perception about who's really committed to work. And often what we're seeing is that people are feeling like those that show up to work and in person tend to be more committed. But as we look, there's a definite split on gender on who is taking more advantage of remote work opportunities, and generally women are by and large. And so now we're starting to see, is there an impact there for women by just saying, oh, I have this opportunity to work remotely, which might actually be inhibiting career advancement. We're still working through those things, but this is an absolute way that we see kind of an impact with just this one. Now we could spend all day talking about another bias here, race, and I mean there's just so many things, but just one example. One study showed that those with white sounding names had 50% more callbacks for interviews than those with black sounding names. All other things kind of being kept equal, that was pretty much the differentiator. And there are a lot of different documented cases here doing this. Let's look a little bit on campus. I think this is from the Committee on Equity, Race and Belonging, or Race, Equity and Belonging report. But one of the things that they looked at is just kind of the breakdown of BYU full-time faculty. Now, this was a couple of years old because the report was turned in about 2 years ago. And so we just kind of see some of the kind of the makeup of what we have here for faculty. You can see that there's we have some differences there. But we also can look at, and again, this is a few years old now, but the leadership of the colleges, schools, and divisions. And we'll see that we've increased a little bit there on over 10 years. It'll be interesting to see how this continues to change and work with this. But so we do have some some issues here. Yeah.
See the stack behind you. Yeah, thank you.
Sorry. Yeah. As I'm standing in the way. Okay. Yeah. And so as you can see, I mean, overwhelmingly, okay, and then this is just another one that was pulled from that report, was just who do we invite to devotionals or forums? And I've noticed that we've made a much greater effort to work on this in the last couple of years. But you can see that white men still make up a large majority of the speakers at either the Kennedy Center or the devotionals and forums. So yeah, we see differences there, and it's interesting. So it does happen. I mean, we see kind of this, and I don't think anybody went out and said, you know what, let's just invite white men to come and speak. But we see kind of where kind of the results are. Okay, just another one too is age. And that's one well documented in, say, even things like Silicon Valley. We've seen a lot of reports out of that there's been a lot of age discrimination. I mean, but there's others too. Height. But we have an let's see, about 30% of male CEOs in the United States of Fortune 400 companies are at least 6'2", even though they only represent about 4% of the population, so they're overrepresented. I don't know, just all kinds of different things. So, I mean, it's not just those. I mean, you've got, we see weight also is one, disability status, parental status. I mean, sometimes even where you went to college. I mean, there's all kinds of different ways that this will happen. Okay. So what are some of the ways that we also kind of need to watch out for besides just kind of those? But one of the things that we see is a confirmation bias, and one that we kind of need to watch out for. So I like this. And I feel like this is just kind of how the last several years of social media has played out entirely. We'll look for, just the confirmation where we kind of have something in our head and then we go to do research and we're really just looking for things that validate what we already believe. And this is important. So just to be aware that this is a very real thing that plays in our brain. We want to be right, and our brains want to be right. And so we continue to kind of look for that. So that's one to kind of watch out for, one of the biases out of those 188. Another one is affinity bias. I think this is really interesting. This is kind of that birds of a feather type of idea, is that, and I like this quote here, that the first barrier to inclusion is affinity bias, the fact that we tend to favor people who are just like us. Now, this can have impact on who we promote, who we hire, who we give assignments to, just the people that we associate with. And so, that's a big one. Sometimes, like I always go back to kind of hiring because it's sort of an HR function and something I think about quite a bit. But a lot of times we will hire somebody because they have a good cultural fit. And one of the shifts that we're trying to make is, instead of looking at cultural fit, is to say, hey, how would this person be a cultural add? How can they add to our culture instead of just kind of conforming to something? And it's subtle shifts like that can really help make a difference. Okay, I think one more of these, and then we will talk about what we can do about it. So one is conformity bias, and you may or may not be able to see this, but it's got the boss standing there, and it says all those in favor say aye, and they audibly say aye, but in their minds they're thinking, no way, this is not going to happen. And there sometimes is a pressure to conform to kind of what's perceived as the norm. And even if you think, well, I don't really agree with that, sometimes we'll find ourselves agreeing just because everybody else is. And this is pretty well documented, and there's been all kinds of studies done with this as well. So hopefully the point is we do have biases that we live with every day, and these have a big impact on a lot of what we're doing. So what can we do? And that's the big question. So I want to there's three things, but I wanted to kind of start with a little bit of a case study. So this is a study that was done. I thought this was fascinating, but they looked at and kind of set it up the context to say, we want to hire a police chief. And so they set up kind of resumes that were pretty much identical, except the only thing that they did was candidates, the study were given resumes of 2 male police chiefs. One had school smarts and one had street smarts. So that's kind of how they labeled those. One had kind of a advanced education. The other one had a lot of good street experience for being a police officer. And so they had them kind of pick which one of these do you think is more important? And they said, the majority of the respondents said school smarts. As a police chief, you've got to make executive decisions. So that was kind of their baseline. Like, okay, so if we're looking at this, what they said was school smarts are most important. New group of people, they did a second round here, used the same resumes, except this time genders were attached. And so what happened is that no matter what combination of school smarts and street smarts and gender were attached to the resumes, they always picked the male candidate. So, and they wouldn't say, of course they wouldn't say, well, because he's male. They would say, oh, street smarts are really important in this job. Okay. Then if it was, if it was a school smarts, well, school smarts are really important. So they kept associating it with kind of the job. But in reality, as they looked at the numbers, it was a gender situation. Okay, so as we thought about this, how would we're going to structure, design something to help ourselves? There's a lot of things that we can do. But one of the and you can say, well, what if we de-identified the resumes? I mean, there's a lot of different things to do, and HR departments have been doing things like that too. But what they found in this particular study is they did another round, and before they were able to look at the resumes, they said, we're hiring for a police chief. What do you think is most important in this? School smarts or street smarts? And again, they said school smarts. So then when they went in and looked at the resumes, what they found was that they tended to pick school smarts regardless of gender. So just the design or the structure of how they've set this up. So all you designers, this is important. The design of kind of how they did this really had a big impact on the outcome of what was picked. Okay, so we know that we can do things to help ourselves with this. So with that in mind, there's kind of 3 things I wanted to talk about with the remaining time here. So we can help mitigate this this behavior, because we can't get rid of it. These are baked into our heads. So how do we kind of become more aware of this and do this? So we're going to talk about increasing awareness. We'll come back to kind of that design idea, and then we will work on actively diversifying our world. So let's look at this first one, and that is to increase awareness. So the first thing is to kind of accept that we have there are biases out there, and to start kind of looking for it. And that's an important thing. So how many of you have read a book by Malcolm Gladwell? Anybody? Tipping Point. Let's see, he's got a couple others. Blink. Yeah, they're great. So Malcolm Gladwell, his mom is Jamaican. And so he actually took that IAT assessment that I told you about. And he talks about this in one of his books, but in an interview. And he said, I took it for the first time, the implicit association test. And it told me that I had a moderate preference for white people. I was slightly biased against Black people towards white people, which horrified me because my mom's Jamaican. The person in my life who I love more than almost anyone else is Black. And here I was taking a test which said, frankly, I wasn't too crazy about Black people. Okay, so this is a person that you'd think, oh, this person doesn't have a bias here. And yet, there it is, the socialization, the things that surround him have all kind of combined. And when he took this implicit association test, it's there. So again, we all want to feel like this doesn't apply to me, and I and all of this, but we do. These things are really deeply embedded into our brains and how we're wired up. So what we want to do is kind of recognize, yeah, we've got these biases. So what do we do about it? So I found a TED Talk that was really interesting and had a great tool, and I love this tool. So this is why I share it, because I think it's one of the ways that we can kind of help ourselves. So this is Kristen Pressner, and she gives this TED Talk. But here she's going to talk a little bit about what's one thing that we can do to help ourselves.
Sorry.
Oh, so she calls it a flip it to test it.
Did you optimize?
Yeah, that's what I meant to do,
Oh,
and
okay.
that's what I didn't do.
Okay.
So now we're optimal. Okay, there we go. Oh.
The research shows that we all have a bias against women leaders. We just don't know it. I had both a man and a woman ask me for a raise at the same time, so I was confronted with my different reactions real time. And I could notice it when I was accidentally treating people differently. Luckily that happened and I realized in time, but how many times have I not caught myself? How many times have you not caught yourself? So what's the antidote to being a senseless, intolerant bigot toward women leaders or anyone else? It's a big stretch to imagine that we'll always have the opportunity to cross-check our reactions with two different people in real life. But I've realized we don't need to. We can do this comparison mentally, and it's just as eye-opening. Just mentally flip whoever you're dealing with for someone else to test yourself. Like here. I made a slight change to this slide. I flipped the photos. Does anything on this slide feel weird? Flip it to test it. If it feels weird, you might want to check yourself.
Okay, so pretty simple concept is just that sometimes if we can flip the idea there and ask ourselves, wait a minute, does this sound strange? Then we might want to take a step back and So as I try to apply this in some ways to hiring, because I think we're all kind of familiar with that process. For instance, sometimes we'll get interviewers who will ask something like, hey, how are you going to take care of your kids while you're working? And so what we're hoping that they'll step back and say, if this was they almost always ask that of women, right? So if you were to step back and say, would I ask this question of the male candidates? And if you say, no, I would have never thought about that. Okay, wait a minute. I might want to think about this question and wonder. So that's a kind of how we would flip it. So another kind of example, go to the next slide.
Oh, is it not working for you again?
Is, I know sometimes it's the video.
Okay, try it now.
The research.
Oh, there we go. All right. So for instance, so just kind of gave that one away already, a different example. So, but yeah, you get kind of the idea of doing that. So how about this one? So in our company, we aspire to have 30% women in leadership roles. Yes. If we flip that, in our company, we aspire to have 70% men in leadership roles. Wow, that doesn't sound so good anymore. So we can kind of look at flipping that. That's one of the tools that we can use that can be helpful. Okay, so I've one more video here that I wanted to show. This introduces kind of how we can design. So once we're aware of these things, then we can figure out how do we kind of make adjustments in the way that we do things so that we can kind of help mitigate this. So just like that police chief study, there are things that we can do. Okay, so this is, let's see, Yasmin Abdelmagid. And so she's a really interesting person, but here she's going to talk a little bit about a classic case in kind of bias in looking at it with orchestras.
There's this really famous experiment in the space of unconscious bias, and that's in the space of gender in the 1970s and 1980s. So orchestras back in the day were made up mostly of dudes. There was up to only 5% were female. And apparently that was because men played it differently, presumably better, presumably. But in 1952, the Boston Symphony Orchestra started an experiment. They started blind auditions. So rather than face-to-face auditions, you would have to play behind a screen. Now, funnily enough, right, no immediate change was registered until they asked the auditioners to take their shoes off before they entered the room. Because the clickety-clack of the heels against the hardwood floors was enough to give their ladies away. Now get this, The results of the audition showed that there was a 50% increased chance a woman would progress past the preliminary stage, and it almost tripled their chances of getting in. What does that tell us? Well, unfortunately for the guys, men actually didn't play differently, but there was the perception that they did. And it was that bias that was determining their outcome.
Okay, interesting. And if you were to ask the conductors, are you intentionally not allowing women to play in the orchestra? What do you think they would have said? Of course not. No, I'm picking the best players. And they believe that. But this shows us that kind of sometimes if we can adjust the design of what's happening, we can actually, this is a big thing that we can do. Okay, so the second thing then is we want to design our structure and processes and kind of rethink how we are approaching a number of different things. So, so this is a big one. So we'll go from, extremely highbrow, like maybe a kind of an orchestra to American Idol. So almost the same. No, but I love this, just thinking of the structure. And so if you've watched American Idol or some of those shows, there's kind of an idea where a person comes in, they audition, these four, whoever the judges are will judge, that's what they do and everything. And so, but if you contrast that with, say, The Voice, at least presumably, with the idea of that you're listening just to the voice, as opposed to kind of how do they look, and that you kind of get a different idea of what's happening there. So even in this kind of goofy example, we'll see that kind of a change in design can probably get different results from what we're looking at. Okay, so there's so as we think about this and think about how my current hiring processes, and this could be just think about when if you're a manager or something, continue to keep the groups the same, or maybe even adjust that a little bit. And so that's one of those things that we like to ask departments, and we like to look at this to say, is there anything about the questions we ask, who's asking the questions, the design of all of these different things, or how we're even picking the people that we want to interview. And those are some good ways that we can do this. So, it turns out that there are things that we can do. We can de-identify resumes or kind of the qualifications. We can do kind of those auditions behind a screen. We can identify we can identify what it is that we're looking for ahead of reviewing the applicants. We can also have a standardized set of questions instead of going off of just having people that like to shoot from the hip. I've heard people say here on campus, and those all lead to outcomes that are pretty predictable. So those are just some of the things that we can do. Let's see. Okay, so the last one, and then we'll open up for a few questions here, but that we can do. So besides just being more aware and thinking about how things are designed and what's the process for how decisions are made, how raises are given, how assignments are given, all those different things. We're just thinking about it and trying to run it through some of our tests there. We can also work to actively diversify our world. So there are a lot of different viewpoints out there. And so if we can kind of make sure that we're exposing ourselves to those, that can be helpful. So a couple of things that we can do. One is just to seek out diverse voices and opinions in our media sources and social media. Unfortunately, social media right now is kind of designed to just give you exactly what you want. And it just to kind of create sort of an echo chamber. Nowhere is that more evident than TikTok. How many of you have gone through TikTok and everything? Is it freaky how if you spend more than 1 second on any one video, you're just seeing more of those? I think Instagram's even worse a little bit on the reels with that. It's crazy. Like they're measuring like what's happening, and so, but we get this with the news sources that we look at and everything. So if we always expose ourselves to kind of one viewpoint, that's kind of what we're going to be approaching things with. So one of the things that Liz Wiseman, who is a BYU grad, is a very successful kind of consultant and wrote a bestseller book, Multipliers, but She's also a forum speaker here, and you can go check out Liz Wiseman's forum address. It's pretty great from 2016. But anyway, one of the things that she in her book Rookie Smarts talks about is that we should be trying to seek out different points of view because it exposes us, even if we don't agree, to where people are coming from. And that's one of the things that she really recommends as she's doing this. She also recommends kind of a reverse mentoring. Sometimes we look at mentoring as being kind of one directional, saying, I need somebody that's been in this for a longer time or has more experience, but it can work the other way too. I'm constantly being taught new things by the students that work in our office. I was like, wow, that is amazing, and so we want to try to open ourselves up, not just to kind of, well, here's the same old way that we've been doing things and try to help ourselves out with that. And finally, we just want to listen to people's experiences and try to kind of gain that understanding. Another forum speaker that came not too long ago, Brian Stevenson, and if you haven't read Just Mercy, I'd highly recommend that one. But he's the author of that anyway, and he came and he talked about the importance of getting proximate to a large number of different people and just getting to know people that are different from ourselves and how important that is and how that can really help with a number of different ways to help us. So those are some of the things that we can do. Some of the small adjustments. So in the book Blind Spot, I believe it was talked about at Harvard's Kennedy School, they realized that on their walls, they had a number of different people, alumni and distinguished people, and that none were female. And it's not that the students were coming in saying, why are there no women on the walls? But once they noticed it and they started making some changes, the students, all of a sudden, there were students that started commenting saying, it's so nice to see somebody that's like me in a position or to see the success that they've had. And in some cases, they said that, that had inspired them to say, I really can do this. I don't feel like I'm just a fish out of water here. So it's a small adjustment, but that's something that can make a big impact. And then the author of, let's see, the Harvard professor and co-creator of the IAT, Mazrinar Benaji, created a screensaver that looks something like this. And she just tried to find a whole bunch of different types of people and put that on there. And it's because that's different than what she was seeing on a regular basis. And what she found, though, is that she had to switch these up periodically because after a while it just turns into wallpaper. You just don't see it anymore. So she had to kind of adjust it and change it and then do this. So it's a number of different things that we can do to kind of look at that. Okay, so those are the three things, and I think we're running here low on time. So I did want to have some question and answer. Well, you can question, I can try to answer. We'll see how that goes. But what we've covered a lot of ground. I'll kind of, there are biases that are out there, and then kind of raising awareness, thinking about the design, and then actively trying to kind of diversify your world, looking for different sources. Those are things that have been proven to help us, see those and. So anyway, questions? That was a lot of information very quickly. Yeah.
Faculty. You be sure to speak loud for the.
So you're asking when will there be more female faculty in the program? It's a good question. Absolutely.
Anytime soon enough.
Yeah, so I mean, we are looking, I mean, there are, yeah. That is a very real issue. That's a very real issue here. And there are things structurally, yeah, that we've got to kind of work through there. So excellent question. I don't have this is a great answer. Wish I could wave a magic wand there.
I have two questions. One is Adobe and Lehigh was trying to hire 50% females. Is that not discrimination in some ways? And then the second question was, how do you feel about Walt Disney's live female or Black Mermaid?
I've seen a lot of it online, and I like personally, I'm not really attached to one. I don't know. Maybe it's because of I read a lot of comic books growing up, and so I loved to see different versions of Superman or Batman or different things. So for me, I just think it's another way to tell the story. I think it's kind of fun, to do that. So I don't.
There are a lot of people.
Yeah, there are. I was surprised at how many people really just like, I don't know.
Fictional character, so how is she supposed to look a certain way, but systematically.
None of us know what
ways.
actually look.
So it's the one that I'm a little bit closer to is in the new Lord of the Ring or the new Lord of the Rings of Power. Yeah, there people are talking about let's see, the powers of different things. And I was like, well, how do we know what they look like? Like, how do we know that they are? Yeah, we see that and people say, oh, we're just trying to represent. I don't know. I just look at this and I say, I don't see the wrong in that. How's that affecting the story for you? But that's my perspective. And I'm trying to understand, where people are coming from that. But I think the more that we see different types of people doing different things, I just think that's good. But
Members of our church have a proclivity to one form of bias or another. I'm just curious, or people against not of our church. Has there been any studies that have shown any proclivity or?
boy, that I don't know. I mean, I would say in the church, we probably have the what's the one? Kind of the confirmation,
The affinity bias.
affinity maybe a little bit, and the conformity for sure, because it's a very hierarchical situation. What was your first question?
It was Adobe hiring 50%.
No, it's interesting. Well, if you look at now, and this will be kind of an interesting thing, but if you look at BYU, BYU, this isn't the way that a lot of people look at this, but it's one of the biggest users of affirmative action around. You think, well, wait a minute, how does that happen? And in one of the ways is because BYU does try to have 50-50, admit 50-50 on men and women at this university. If we were to go straight off of numbers, there would be more women than men at this university. What's interesting to me about that is that in this case, the affirmative action, who does it benefit? White males generally, as they're doing that. But it is one of those things that is one that we've made, and we understand the reasons why, or maybe that we want to try to have an equal number of men and women at the university. But there are impacts with that too. And so, I don't know. I think sometimes the numbers or kind of a plan like that are important because otherwise there's so many other factors that are going into it that we don't realize, that we don't understand. Sometimes giving it a push can help, and it's part of a design. It's a design solution. And so for me, I think that's something that's necessary to kind of move forward sometimes. And I think just as far as from my reading and my understanding, which of course is limited, we overestimate how much we're doing and how much impact that we have by, if I'm thinking about this, and we will continue to say, I'm aware I'm doing this, but until we see the numbers change and actual change, people don't generally jump on board in bigger numbers. So if you can change the actual composition of a group of people, or if you can change who gets promoted and do those things, we start to see others follow. And so sometimes it does need a push, and that's my opinion. So you asked for it. Any questions? I think otherwise we're probably we're over time, but I really appreciate you doing this. And if you have questions, I'm happy to stick around for a little bit and answer those, or you can always.
One last question. Is there anything in your training portfolio that you really think you consider maybe next semester? Because I know that you're updating. A lot of this work has been based on, is it Susan Feldman's book or not so much?
Let's see. I don't know which one's Susan Feldman.
Well, she actually wrote a book called.
Maybe. I think that's in my stack still.
Yeah.
So this one, a blind spot was one that we used a lot for this one. I do have kind of a reading. So if you get into that, but just kind of a reading list that I thought was helpful.
We'll have our moderators send that out if you.
And I can actually send the slides to you and.
Look at that. That would be ideal if we could upload those just for these students.
Yeah. So anyway, but those are
wonderful. Thank you. And I've asked Haley if she will to offer a blessing on the food. And if you'd like, we do soup and rolls. It's not a big deal, but you're welcome to join us, Greg, if you'd like. But thanks again from all of us.
Help us to understand and apply it in our lives, and was this that it will give us the energy that we need to go throughout this day, that will be the Spirit with us.
Man. Watch for some announcements. They're coming to you over Canvas.